Howdy, students. What we've talked about so far is pretty abstract. So let's talk about how assessment efforts play out in practice. Before we do that, though, I want to emphasize that because of the credibility and high profile of the IPCC, those trying to cast doubt on climate science must necessarily attack it. Thus, you will hear no end to people criticizing and attempting to delegitimize the IPCC. All you have to do is bring it up with someone you know who's skeptical, and you'll get a blue streak about how terrible and untrustworthy the IPCC is. In fact, they might tell you that they have their own assessment which is more credible than the IPCC's. For example, this group, the Non-Governmental International Panel on Climate Change, or NIPCC, has an assessment, and its assessment claims the opposite of just about everything the IPCC's reports say. For example, here they say that the warming of the last century is not due to humans. In week 7, you'll see that that claim is almost certainly wrong. It's us. We're warming the climate. So in this class, you'll see that the claims of the NIPCC are almost certainly wrong, and it's not a reliable assessment. But what if you're not taking a class on the subject? How do you evaluate these kinds of disputes? Realize that calling something an assessment does not automatically make the document trustworthy. For example, you and a bunch of your friends could get together and write a report saying that the Earth is flat, throw in a few references to peer-reviewed publications to make it look good, and call it an assessment. But that wouldn't mean it accurately summarizes our knowledge about the shape of the Earth. When evaluating an assessment, the important attribute and the thing that gives it credibility is the process by which it is generated. One of the big risks for an assessment is if the writing team is biased towards a particular answer. Let's consider how the IPCC assures an unbiased and expert writing team. The IPCC's writing team is assembled from nominations from member countries. Members are selected from these nominations, and authors are picked to ensure geographical diversity so that no one country dominates. The writing team numbers hundreds of scientists, so any single scientist's bias has virtually no impact on the report. The bottom line is that the IPCC's writing team will only be biased if all of the nearly 200 countries that are nominating scientists are nominating biased or unqualified people. That seems very, very unlikely. So that's the first check on producing an unbiased report. But there are more. After the reports are written, the reports are peer-reviewed by other experts in the field to ensure they represent the peer-reviewed science. In fact, this is a public review, and anyone can send in comments. The reports also undergo a review by member governments. Before the IPCC's fifth assessment report was published in 2013, the report was reviewed by hundreds of scientists and 26 governments, and they dealt with and responded to 50,000 comments. And all of the comments and the responses of the author teams are made public. In the end, the IPCC reports are among the most thoroughly reviewed scientific documents in history. Each report also has what's known as a summary for policymakers, known by its abbreviation SPM. This section of the report is designed to summarize the science in language that policymakers can understand. The SPMs are drafted by the lead authors of the chapters of the report, who are almost entirely well-respected climate scientists. Then it is voted on line by representatives of the member governments of the IPCC. Sentences only go into the SPM if there is unanimous agreement on that sentence. If there are disagreements, government representatives will argue over the wording. This is done because the SPM provides the starting point for climate negotiations. When countries start trying to hammer out a climate policy, the SPM is the body of science that all countries have already agreed upon. Explicitly voting on every sentence prevents a country from later saying, I don't think the science on this issue is settled. Countries have already agreed to every sentence in the SPM. Now let's compare the IPCC with the NIPCC. The NIPCC's writing team is assembled by the lead author. This is a fatal flaw because it puts the entire onus on one person. If that person does not believe in climate change or evolution or that the earth is round, then they have the capability of recruiting like-minded colleagues, and then the report will reflect that crazy conclusion. The IPCC process is explicitly designed to avoid this. It does not give a single person the ability to select the writing teams, but gets nominations from member governments. If you want to argue that the IPCC reports are biased, you have to explain why all of the world's governments are nominating biased people. The NIPCC also says that their reports are peer-reviewed, but the reviewers are selected by the lead author. This is a similar problem. If the lead author selects more of his buddies to review it, then they'll tell him that his report is great, even if it doesn't reflect mainstream science at all. And as far as I can tell, the NIPCC's review is not public like the IPCC's is. I could go on. For example, members of the NIPCC's writing teams are mostly not actually experts in climate science, but I'll leave that for another video. The upshot of all of this is that not all assessments are credible. Believe assessments that come from a credible process and come from trustworthy organizations like the IPCC or the U.S. National Academy of Sciences. If you're unsure about whether an assessment is credible, look at the process that the organization followed when producing it. How was the writing team selected? Was the report peer-reviewed? What procedures were followed? No organization is perfect, but because of the scrutiny of its reports, the IPCC has made huge efforts to be transparent and fair in assessing the science. As a result, it does a great job of describing what we know and how confidently we know it, and almost all of the attacks on it are disingenuous. The NIPCC is the exact opposite. Its adopted process is likely to produce a biased result, so when it contradicts credible assessments, that shouldn't be too surprising. This brings up a related issue. There's a lot of good information out there about climate, like the IPCC reports, but there's also a lot of people out there trying to make things as confusing as possible. As described in the textbook, this was pioneered by the tobacco companies when they tried and succeeded for decades to create doubt about whether smoking was bad for your health. The NIPCC reports are part of this. They're not trying to illuminate the debate, they're actually trying to confuse it. Just as in the tobacco debate, the strategy to prevent our society from taking action to address climate change is to gridlock the debate by making it about the science, and the NIPCC report is part of that effort. In the end, it's up to individual citizens like you to wade through the competing information and identify reliable sources. This is hard, but the first step is to use the information you've learned in this chapter to evaluate sources of information and separate credible resources from those that are simply designed to confuse. And now, your moment of dog.